expertise and knowledge base is not, and when I say limited, comparable to how the progress is happening on the global north side. When I say ethical consideration and bias, it is same as what I was mentioning before in the data side. So basically, there will be algorithm bias if the data that is fed into the system is not complete or not high quality. So we have to think about what kind of consideration we might take into picture when we are looking at large language data models or even biodesign tools. What data is fed in? So because whatever the input is, the exact output is what we are going to get. So there could be some algorithm biases there. The cyber biosecurity threat. So biosecurity threat or the cyber security threat has been talked about for a long time. A lot of this infrastructure issues or the challenges I'm talking about, because the data is stored in this massive data centers or, the network connected, devices. How secure are they? Is it very easy to tinker with? Can someone from outside just tinker with it and alter our data? Or is it very easy to even manipulate the data as the output is going out? We need to think mindfully, and we really need to think about it in advance of how the output is going to come out, because cyber biosecurity threat is a real issue all across the globe, but if it's an even bigger issue, because that's a whole different talk in its own. I've given a lot of cyber biosecurity talks and lectures before, and they are an issue, whether we are talking about network-based systems or whether we are talking about general cyber biosecurity systems. And then you think about, on top of it, if you are artificial intelligence processes into it, it becomes even more bigger threat. And then, of course, there's this whole misuse and dual use potential. What are you doing with the data? And Dr. Carter touched upon that a little bit, where she talked about the unintended consequences. So it could be accidental or it could be deliberate, where how this data is going to get processed and what kind of manipulation can occur. That is going to be another challenge. And accessibility and affordability is another challenge, especially for the global south, because all of this that I'm talking about, whether that infrastructure, the processes, the data centers, data quality, all of that needs a lot of money. So how much resources we have at our disposal, especially in the global south context or in Africa, that will also determine what kind of sophisticated processes or what kind of sophisticated tools we have in our hand. And that has always been an issue. From the context of the global disparity that is there, which brings me to my next point, which is most of the AI discourse, at least so far, has been global, not dominated. So Dr. Carter and I have been actually working together for over 2 years, and she's an extremely valuable expert in our AI governance systems and AI, any kind of artificial intelligence related reports or conversations we conduct. One thing that she mentioned is that even in last 2-3 years that we have become so, out there talking about the artificial intelligence discourse, just not in the life sciences arena, but in all other aspects of artificial intelligence application. But that being said, so far, all the conversations that you see, all kind of executive orders that are coming out of the highest offices are all happening in the north side of the things, global north. And so obviously, because the conversation or the dialogues are dominated on this side of the world, how much participation is happening from the global south? And if the participation is not enough, if we are not having global South participants as much as on our dialogues, then this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. How much robust is what our systems that we are developing are going to be? Because one thing, if we forget everything, one thing that COVID-19 has taught us is that anything that happens in one side of the world is going to eventually impact the entire world. We can't be really separated in our geographical division and think that we are secure. So this is a much bigger challenge that is out there, and we need to be a little mindful as global citizens in general to think about what do we do about this challenge. Challenges that I talked about will eventually have some implications. Since this conversation today is a biosecurity conversation, so I'm going to raise some of the potential biosecurity implications. I have kind of tried to sectionalize it under the different kind of AI systems we are talking about today. So generative AI, AIs or LLMs, we really discuss LLMs in some details today, is a big source of mis or disinformation. Now, I know for a fact, because I do a lot of work in the global south, that misinformation and disinformation in general is a big problem across the globe. But in global south, it is even a bigger challenge. Now, LLMs, they may or may not bring direct biosecurity or bioterror threats. They may not have the capacity to do that yet, or they are being filtered constantly by the developers so that they do not get into that kind of capacity, which becomes a bioterror threat. However, misinformation and disinformation threat has always existed. And these LLMs make it easier to make it a little more wider and a little more accessible for people with a phone and a basic internet to do that. Now, misinformation, disinformation, you have to keep in mind, only happens when, what is that? It is that you just manipulate the information that is out there and make it something that you think is good for your purpose, right? And so LLMs could be fed data because it's all based on data, right? I talked about that before. They can be fed data that could be that is already manipulated data. So like I said, the output is as good as the input. So you can imagine how bigger of a problem it could become, which is already a problem. And that is one thing we have to be mindful and watchful about. Biodesign tools, I think Dr. Carter did a beautiful job. I'm just gonna reiterate that the protein design is easier to do. And it could be a targeted threat depending on if you are trying to design a really harmful pathogen, which is not available in nature, by manipulating the DNA or RNA or protein structure of it. I talked about the biosecurity implication a little bit before about the inequity and bias in the data, and that is totally dependent on the quality, availability, and limited infrastructure. I already did a much more detail on that. I'm happy to answer questions if it comes later. And I am much worried about personal, because agriculture, even for India, where I do a lot of work, and it's of course to my interest, because it's the country I belong to or I come from. Agroterrorism is a big threat, especially with artificial intelligence capabilities getting so advanced, because targeting crop yield, so the same thing that can make it better can also make it worse. So if we are getting so sophisticated in designing proteins or in designing sequences or structures where we can target crop yield for a better purpose, then the same thing can be used for a bad purpose, right? By a bad actor. The same thing, like there are human pathogens which could bring, the biodesign tools can bring them a public health threat. Agroterrorism is the same way designed plant pathogens, which can also bring a huge threat to the economy and eventually to the national security. These are all this could all be national security threats, which is agroterrorism. It is huge in global south and in Africa. So these are some serious biosecurity implications. Now, like I said, none of my talks or none of my lectures are ever about doom and gloom. So I do believe that these innovations are critical, and they can be life-altering for especially countries with medium to limited resources, where they can use this innovation and use these technologies to make their economies and their lives much better. So we'll talk about mitigation strategies, because none of these problems that I was mentioning before is going to doom and loom. Like, we definitely can think about strategies, how to come out of this problem and use it to our benefit. So let's look at the bigger picture first, and then we'll get into specifics. So the risk mitigation in AI biosector, what would it look like for Africa, or what would it look like for Global South? The first thing And I have kept it in orange, but if it was possible, I'll make it red and bold and everything possible, which is capacity building and training. So I think, to give an example of that, Get Consortium today did a fabulous job. What did they do? They identified people based on their expertise and brought into this webinar to talk about what is that we are talking about, because everybody is talking about artificial intelligence. To give you an example, my mother, who's a scientist herself, who does not, she's retired, so she has no idea what artificial intelligence is. But through her intelligent brain, she could put two and two together, that artificial intelligence is an emerging technology which could be used for benefit of our country. So she asked me a question: could you tell me what artificial intelligence is and how it could be used for our benefit? And how is it related to biology? So I think Get Consortium in one way is doing the same thing. It is bringing experts together to talk about, first, what artificial intelligence is, what kind of application it can have, and how we can use it for our benefit. And while we are talking about our benefit, we are also talking about the vulnerabilities that are there in our system so that we can overcome that, right? And that is what I'm talking about here in my first bullet point, which is capacity building and training. Because if you do not know what it is that you're missing, you will never be able to train yourself or build your capacity to address that. So that is first thing that we need to do. And I talked about few of the capacity building measures, and I also talked about the training before, which is, please, we need to, as global citizens, get our knowledge base solid. We need to understand what we are missing, how these applications could be applied for a better benefit or better into a bigger, how it fits into a bigger picture. The other thing that Sarah touched upon, or Dr. Carter touched upon, is development of AI regulatory framework and governance structure. There's a lot of governance and regulatory framework discussion going on in Global North. We need to make sure the Global South partners are on those dialogues or on those conversations so that they can come up with their own challenges. And when we develop this governance structure internationally, actually there are people on the table who that governance structure is going to impact, meaning partners and stakeholders from Global South absolutely have to be on the table for developing a bigger picture international governance structure. Strengthening cyber biosecurity infrastructure. I gave a little, I delve into a little details already, how the biosecurity or cybersecurity structure may not be up to the mark just yet, and how we have to make sure they reach a certain capacity so that we are able to handle such sophisticated AI processes. Foster international partnerships and participations in AI governance, which goes right with the second bullet point that I talked about. We absolutely need to have international partnerships because, yes, US, UK, and other global North countries who are making progresses, they have much bigger resources. They have trained scientists and policymakers and software developers and companies which are out there, which are developing every day. They are making a better software. They obviously are dominating the dialogue right now, but we cannot ignore the fact that there are companies like IBM who has opened IBM Africa, IBM and Microsoft Africa Research Center in 2019 and 2020. They have opened centers in Nairobi and Lagos. So clearly, these companies are recognizing the importance of Africa and in Global South in general to partner to make sure there's a massive amount of data, and there are a lot of people who live there, which could eventually benefit just not the globe, just not the country itself, but across the globe, right? So we also need to recognize that on the governance side of things and foster meaningful international partnerships and dialogues. Now, if I want to get into specifics, I said this before, and I'm repeating myself, that development of knowledge base is important. Understanding risk reduction strategies at the digital physical interface, and Dr. Carter already went into a little bit details on that how we have to create some guardrails in the digital and in the physical world separately and together. We also need to think about preserving the benefits by applying AI bio tools to strengthen pandemic preparedness and health security, which is again a bigger challenge in Global South and Africa. So we have to constantly think about how we can preserve the benefit and apply these tools to strengthen our pandemic preparedness. And while we are doing that, we can talk about the vulnerabilities and do our best to minimize the vulnerabilities to best of our capacity. Stakeholder outreach and community building. So this should happen within Africa. Africa is clearly a huge country with a lot of human resource and a lot of resource potential if we talk amongst each other, if we do stakeholder outreach and community building within the country. And then, of course, you go out and you recognize or you identify people who are doing work outside outside Africa, and then you bring them together to the dialogue. And that's how you do community building. And like I said, Get Consortium is doing a fabulous job of that. Governing or managing access of AI tools. If the country is either developing an AI tool or it is getting an AI tool from outside, it should take a minute before it starts applying the artificial intelligence tool to think, what are we exactly doing? And how that can be how we can be vulnerable through any of these tools, whether that's our data, is there a privacy concern, is there an equity concern, is there an ethical concern? So we need to take a minute to do that before we start giving general access to any of our AI tools and data to anyone and everyone. And that will only help if we have the kind of knowledge base and if we have the kind of training which has trained our brain to work in that manner, that whenever we have a new tool or whenever we have a new software, we are asking these questions consistently and continually. And last but not the least, the future of AI in Africa. So I do a lot of work in Global South. I'm employed with Nuclear Threat Initiative, the same organization that Dr. Carter was talking about. And we do a lot of governance work in biotechnology and other emerging technologies. So I look at the picture from the Global North perspective. I look at the picture because of my expertise in Global South perspective. And I look at a picture generally as a world, right? So if you ask me about the bigger picture, the future of artificial intelligence in Africa, I would say the future is bright. This picture is just to show here that the different kind of application artificial intelligence has or could have in solving Africa's biggest problem: food security, pandemic preparedness and epidemic preparedness, development of vaccines and other therapeutic measures, and providing robust infrastructure in cyber, biosecurity, and otherwise. I think artificial intelligence has a lot of possibility, and Africa's opportunities are massive. We just need to make sure we be mindful as we are making progress as a society. We are looking at innovation from the perspective of using it for maximizing our benefits, but we are not forgetting about the vulnerabilities that exist in our system. And we constantly work together to reduce those risks. And we foster relationships within the country, outside the country, and build a community. So we are, as a community, able to address those risks and move forward. So that is what my vision is, or that is what I think about generally the future of artificial intelligence in Global South and in Africa. Now, last but not the least, I would like to reiterate Dr. Carter mentioned, the NTI International Artificial Intelligence Bio Forum. Dr. Carter and I are working very closely on this forum. She's working with us, and she's leading this forum. And we are doing really our best, like Dr. Carter said, to make it really, in true meaning, international. So just not ticking the box, but actually fostering relationships internationally and bringing partners together so that we can have a true, meaningful international norms for AI biogovernance setup. So not just creating the governance structure so it can be applied later, but actually having those people on the table so they can talk about their challenges, and we can develop a forum which is meaningful and norms are developed internationally to be used as for AI biogovernance, so that we can maximize the benefits and reduce the risk of this absolutely fantastic technology. With that, I'd like to finish my presentation today. Thank you so much for having me here, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. Those both are my email addresses for NTI, the organization I work for, and my personal email address. I've also put my personal professional website down there. I'm always open for partnership and fostering relationships to make sure that we talk about emerging technologies in a meaningful way. So feel free to send me an email, connect me with on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to answer any question. Thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Gupta, for that very, very interesting presentation. It's interesting. This presentation is directed directly to Africa, and we can see the importance of artificial intelligence to Africa in solving emerging challenges we're facing in the global south, especially in Africa. We're very happy to have you on this platform, Dr. Gupta, and we're very happy for this very detailed presentation you've given us. These are the kind of things that you don't just hear anywhere. These are very, very detailed information that are very useful for decision makings, especially by policymakers and stakeholders on the continent. So before we go on, I want to say that one of the things we'll do with these webinars is that especially interesting and emerging webinars that are on emerging technologies and emerging areas of biosecurity like this, is that at the end of the webinar, we will go back at the guest secretariat and see how we can develop a policy brief based on information we'll gather from the webinar and other available information, and we're going to share stakeholders within the continent. Because you agree with me that the kind of information and knowledge we're gaining from this webinar, it's very important for us to harness it and share it as wide as possible, so that relevant stakeholders within the continent, especially in Africa, will have the opportunity to listen and to read policy briefs and hopefully use information on the policy briefs for decision making and affecting strategies and governance structures or governance decisions on the continent. So thank you very much for that very detailed and directed presentation. The presentation was directed towards Global South and Africa, and it explains clearly how we can maximize opportunities, artificial intelligence opportunities on the continent, and also how we can reduce the risk that goes with it. You started with identifying opportunities in AI opportunities in life science, especially in the health sector, development of vaccines, disease prediction, improvements in detection and surveillance, and other interesting areas. And these are areas that we are really challenged in Africa. Outbreaks and pandemics and epidemics are big issues in this part of the world. Take especially emerging diseases like Ebola, like dengue fever, like Lassa fever. These are emerging issues now, and the frequency and intensities of these diseases, they are increasing on a yearly basis. So maximizing these opportunities and these platforms to address these diseases is very important. And Africa, especially the African CDCs and other relevant organizations within the continent, should leverage on AI and other emerging technologies to see how we can reduce the occurrence of emerging infectious diseases on the continent. Another area you focused on was on improving crop yield and quality, promoting sustainable development and enhance research and innovation and development on the continent, especially in the area of crop yield and quality. Africa is the youngest continent, and the population of Africa is increasing seriously on a year-to-year basis. One of the biggest challenges we are having on the continent is how do we effectively feed the young and vibrant population that we're having on the continent. So it's very important for us to maximize every opportunity and emerging technologies to increase not just the quality, but the quantity of food that is being produced on the continent to feed our emerging increasing population. And you talked about current and future challenges. You talked about infrastructure and connectivity. infrastructures, biological infrastructures that has to do with availability of light, internet, and these are some basic things that we're still struggling with on the continent. Data availability, quality, limited expertise, and knowledge-based, and ethical consideration. It's very important for us to build expertise on the continent at various levels, expertise at the highest level, and also bring up new young scientists to bring up to date with emerging technologies and the concept of AI and other forms of emerging technologies. Talk about cyber biosecurity threats, misuse and dual use potential, which is one of the biggest challenges we also have in Africa today. Africa will need to develop governance structures, especially in research on the continent, and we also have to govern the kind of research we do on the continent, the kind of collaborations we do, especially with the global north and things like that, to make sure that Africa does not become a dumping site for just any kind of research, and we have to be careful and have clear governance structure for the kind of research we tolerate and we allow on the continent, and also strategies and structures around emerging BSL3 labs, and we are having more BSL3 labs on the continent now, and this goes with a whole lot of responsibility and need for us to develop governance structures and biosecurity and biosafety strategies to make sure that we don't have deliberate or accidental misuse of dangerous biological agents in these BSL3 labs. So you talked about a whole lot of interesting things that I don't want to repeat what you said, but I just want to thank you for this very detailed presentation, and I assure that we're going to turn into a policy brief, which we're going to share as wide as possible on the continent. African leaders need to hear this. Our policymakers, our stakeholders need to hear this and learn from it and possibly use it for decision making and policy guide policy direction on the continent. So without wasting our time, we'll go to the question and answer section. I can see that Dr. Sarah have answered most of the questions. Let me flip through if we still have one or two questions that have not been answered. And also to our audience, our participants will give opportunity to one or two persons to speak. You can see somebody raised up his hand, but the name is not here, webinar participants. Can the Secretariat give the open the platform and give the webinar participants 2 minutes to contribute? I can see somebody raise his hand there. Is it possible for you to give the person 2 minutes to speak? Can you unmute the person and give him 2 minutes to speak, please? Get Secretariat.
Hello.
Yes, you have the floor, please.
My name is Godfrey Tangwa. I'm based in Yaoundé, Cameroon. I appreciate very much the two lectures that we've just had. They are very enlightening. But I will ask only a small question to Dr. Carter. I think Dr. Carter somehow minimized the possibility of the risk when artificial intelligence combines with biology. And one of these is just the possibility of weaponizing that. This would be very difficult because the good experts would not allow it, and ordinary people would find it very hard to have all the information to be able to do it. But I think that all that depends on the motivation that is there and the benefits that are perceived in doing that. And on the other hand, the good experts themselves could be motivated to do it. And in that case, we have no protection at all. If they thought that the benefits were so good that they would do it, they would be able to do it. So we shouldn't think that, well, the good experts are very protective. They could have a motivation for, let's say, weaponizing a virus or targeting a particular DNA group of human beings for harm. Yes, so that is my question, Dr. Carter. What protection would you propose for this scenario, for this possibility? Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're right. Your concern is one that is shared among many experts about just the misuse of these tools, and it is, and the difficulty, or a big part of the difficulty, is that, especially for some of these biodesign tools, the benefits, the positive uses, are so closely related to the bad uses. So, you know, when you have a tool that can give you very good, you know, vaccine candidates, or can tell you, you know, that, you know, one of these types of countermeasures, this, you know, monoclonal antibody will bind to the disease, you know, the viral protein the way you want it to. When you have tools that are very powerful that way, those same tools will tell you, you know, a viral pathogen that will escape that vaccine, or that will, you know, not bind to that antibody. And the use and the misuse are so closely related. And you're right, it does come down to how they are used and the intentions of those who are using them. One thing that I think makes me more optimistic is just in talking to some of the communities of people that are developing these tools. One of the things I've been involved in is there was a meeting in October at the University of Washington at the Institute for Protein Design, and they have a their Institute for Protein Design. They have a big network of people that are developing some of these tools, and the Rosetta Commons they are the people behind the Rosetta Commons, which is a really really big community of protein designers, and they develop different kinds of tools, and they compare them, and they, you know, use them, and, you know, try to make them better all the time. But at this meeting in October, they decided that they really needed to put together some principles for responsible development of these tools. And so I've been working with them. There's been a task force that they put together to develop principles. And they have taken it very seriously. And I've been very pleased with the way that they have approached it. And those principles should be available pretty soon. And it is a voluntary framework. So it's something that you would, you know, somebody might sign on to, and it just says, you know, it says that they should be used, but, you know, the principles will say things like that they should be developed responsibly, that we should try to understand their risks, that we should, you know, work with others to maximize the benefits. They're very eager to make sure that their tools, you know, are used to maximize all of the good uses of those tools. So there's just a lot of engagement from that community. And I think that if you spread that kind of awareness, and even a voluntary framework, even if it's not, you know, it won't be perfect, even a regulatory or required framework would not be perfect, but even in that kind of voluntary context, I think it's really good for raising awareness and for developing that shared understanding about what we're dealing with here. You know, about like how we are going to have to struggle now and forever about how these tools could be misused. And I think that, you know, it's a tough question. And I think that you can't make bad people good, but at least you can make the good people pay attention and be aware of those kinds of risks.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. I can see the conversation is generating serious interest. And we are going to take two more contributions, then we'll take two questions, then we'll round up for the day. I can see Professor Tomori he wants to speak. Secretary, can you unmute Professor Tomori to speak, please?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go on, Prof.
I'm so delighted that I'm actually in Trieste in Italy, where we're also talking about AI and biological weapons. And what came out of this meeting is the absence of Africa and many of the countries in the southern region out of the discussion on AI. And I think what is important for us is the same thing that happened during the COVID situation. If we don't equitably contribute to what is going on AI, we'll be at the receiving end of AI again. And so our hope is that I'm glad about this seminar. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you, Dr. Carter, for this presentation. You raised the important thing, awareness. It is time for us in Africa, scientists and everybody, to get involved. There are scattered zones of AI activities going on, but it's not coordinated. And nobody actually knows what is happening everywhere. Sometimes we are duplicating efforts. We don't know that is going on. So I think this kind of awareness can get down to our policymakers. Even we, the scientists ourselves, we are responsible. I wonder how many of those listening on this know anything about what AI can do. Thank you for the opening our eyes. And I think you are in a good position to get, part of the advice we gave at this meeting was that the Scientific Advisory Committee of the BW should begin to do a needs assessment and situational analysis of what is happening in the African region, so as to encourage the contribution of the African region to what is going on in AI, and not be at the same as being with other things that have been going on. This is opportunity for us. So I want to thank you again and hope that will move this forward beyond that and link between Dr. Skatas and Sengupta, how we can get our people together and get something done earlier now before it's too late. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm dashing back to the other meeting, but I just thought I should be glad to be here to hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Professor Tomori, and hopefully GETS will do all it can do to make sure that we'll create a platform for continuous discussion about AI and other emerging technologies on the continent. This discussion should not just end. Will not just end with this webinar, but I believe that this is the beginning of a platform for coordination, AI coordination, and emerging technology coordination on the continent. There's somebody on the platform, webinar participant, his name is not clear, or I can't say the name, but can you open give the person opportunity to speak for 2 minutes? Secretariat. Okay, Michael Amune. Yes, you have the floor, please.
All right. Good afternoon, able doctors. I sincerely appreciate the way and manner you made the presentations from the first through the second presentation in this webinar. Is a very great experience being on this seminar today, and you guys have given us more eye opener on the AI, as it is something that I want to make a passionate appeal that after this section, if we can also be able to have a document from your presentation of this lecture today, so that we can also follow up by using that to also boost up our knowledge on it. And so as we have a continuous discussion on the long run, we would be able to see how effectively and efficiently well, we can also put in all we require to ensure that we are able to deliver well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael Mune, for that, for the contribution. I guess our time is fast spent. Now we are going to take 2 questions from the question and answer sections, and our speakers will respond to that. And other questions we're going to harvest it and share. They'll send us the answer, and we'll share it with our participants after this presentation. The first question is from Zakaria Yusuf. He said, do you have any idea on governance mechanisms that can help speed up the convergence of AI and biogovernance, like guidelines or regulations or any evidence-based practice so far? I think I will give Dr. Sarah first, then Dr. Sengupta will go after Dr. Sarah.
Yeah, right now, the sort of guidelines and regulations that are in place, well, there are no official regulations, but there are ideas for oversight. In the US, for example, there's a White House executive order on AI that has some ideas about how to reduce risks. It calls for evaluations of models that are of a certain size, that are mostly the large language models. And it calls for, ideas for reducing those risks, but it's not, it's a little bit, right now, people are still trying to figure out what that will look like. The same is true in the UK. There are some ideas about what they should be doing, and people are sort of scrambling in many different directions right now to try to figure out what they should do, particularly on the biology side about what to do with the life sciences and that intersection. But right now there's not a lot of harmonization. It's people are very much just trying many different things. And I think that's probably appropriate for right now. It's still a very new kind of technology. Everybody is still trying to understand what the risks really are and what the options for reducing those risks are. But that is one reason that we want to put together the NTI AI Bio Forum, this international forum, because there are so many different efforts. And this is one reason that we focused it on best practices and trying to see all the different ways that people are thinking about model evaluations, for example, to see how much they might empower, a potential bioterrorist, or to have developed some best practices about how you might control access to different models in a way that ensures, equity and access. And so there are too many different things happening right now, and not enough discussion about what makes the most sense and how we should move forward, and especially what makes the most sense in this more in a global context, not just in the immediate context where a lot of this work is taking place. So I mean, I'll stop there. I don't have any, there's no good answer right now. I'll just mention too, I mentioned the voluntary framework that the protein design community is coming up with right now. And to me, that's another good approach, because it will encourage people to develop ideas and practices. And I think we're going to have to support that kind of exploration to figure out what works best.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sengupta.
Yeah, so I will piggyback on Dr. Carter's response and say that she's correct. We do not have any established regulations, even in the global north side, which is I mentioned that during my presentation. There are some executive orders that came out of the highest office in the United States from White House, and there has been an AI summit organized by Mr. Prime Minister's office in UK. So there has been some efforts where people are trying to understand what the risks are, because they don't want to be over-regulatory. That is one issue, because if you are over-regulatory, then you stifle the innovation or the the emerging technology side. So they don't want to do that. At the same time, they're trying to address the risk in a meaningful manner. So it's been a little tricky. It's a new technology and applications are wide. So also not only the development side of AI, you also have to keep the application side of the AI. And getting precisely or specifically onto the question of life science, AI-enabled life science technology or the use. I think somebody mentioned, I just saw on the chat that there is a WHO resource that came out. It did come out. It's not a regulation. It is a kind of like a framework that they have proposed, looking into the different kind of AI applications and how that can be like used as perhaps like as a guideline, governance guidance or guideline. One thing I would say, for each to its own, meaning every country is using AI capabilities or technologies or AI-enabled technologies in a certain manner. So for Africa, I kind of listed out the priorities where it could be primarily used depending on the challenges that the country is facing. So I think at this very beginning or initiation stage, it would be best because we are trying to have some representative from Africa on our International AI Bio Forum. And so if they come up with some of the possible things that they are looking into as a challenge and come and contribute to our forum while we are trying to come up with the best practices or a governance structure, that would eventually probably be, hopefully at one time, it will be a little more kind of, I wouldn't say regulation, but more on a like a accepted best practices or guidelines kind of structure. But that's all we have. There are a lot of proposed structures and there are a lot of proposed risk or vulnerability identification based on the where you are placed geographically and the kind of technology you're using in that, right? And so that's the best we have right now. Eventually, I'm hoping within a year or two, a lot of people are working a lot of work there, having a lot of conversations. And so we'll come up with a much more robust framework. But we invite people, and we have invited Dr. Bobadoy, and so from Africa. So if you have any other suggestions that you would like for him to, especially in context of Africa, please give him your suggestions. And we are trying to do it a little bit meaningfully in the International AI Bio Forum. And we are probably, and Dr. Carter can correct me, but I think we are probably the first ones to do that in the life sciences sector in a much more organized fashion.
Thank you. Let's take one more question. Our time is fast spent. Just going to take one more, then we harvest the other questions and we'll send the questions to our speakers to respond. We're going to take from Miriam Sani. Great talk. My question is, as Dr. Carter mentioned, there are reports as it is does not address the whole world and work still needs to be done on that. Like what type of work can be tailor-made for each region? For each region, this context, I don't understand. Like, I think she's trying to say, what kind of work do you think can be done in Africa in the area of AI and biosecurity?
So I can try to address the question and I'll give it over to Sarah. I think some of the work I already identified in my presentation. So we need to think about the challenges we want to, so this is, yes, for Africa, I have presented, but generally for any other region, if you pick, especially in the global South, the first question that we need to ask is that what are the biggest challenge that is faced by the region? So that's where you will get the answer first, because whatever the biggest challenges are, that's where the application of AI would make more sense, right? So let's say for Africa, I would say first three things, if you ask me, from my understanding of African context or global South context, there will be first top three things that will be in my list that I'm trying to solve. Number one will be food security. Number two will be epidemic and pandemic preparedness and response. And number three will be agricultural, cyber, or just like general research and innovation build for economic growth, right? Those are the three things in that order, or probably You can match the order a little bit and go up and down. But there will be the applications mostly. And so then we can look at the available AI tools or the tools that we are trying to develop in our country. What will be the tools and how the applications will take place. Once you have a fair idea of that, that's when you start looking at the benefits and the risk, and then you try to minimize the benefits and maximize the risk. That is a very generalized idea of how the region should think about. I was reading through the comments and I noticed one thing. Somebody mentioned that we have to have an internal coordinated task force on AI within Africa. I think that is a fantastic idea. Like I said, one thing would be to go outside and collaborate with, global North efforts. And we are already giving invitations. Dr. Carter sent out invitation to different countries, Africa being one of them, and Dr. Bobada is invited there. But then other thing would be internal coordination is absolutely critical, because you need to understand and you need to come into agreement of what are the priorities for a country that we need to seek solutions for. So that is what my insight into this whole regional application or regional efforts would be. Over to Dr. Carter.
Yeah, I'll take a different approach to that question and talk about kind of, when we're talking about guardrails for AI models and development of AI models, and right now, many of these models are being developed in the global North, in the US and the UK, and also in China to some extent. But I feel like there's going to be a big discussion about the equity and access to these models. And, right now there's a lot of discussion, some of the big companies, for example, that are developing the most powerful large language models, some of them, they're very happy to say, oh, okay, we'll put it, we'll make sure nobody can use it except the way we want. And they're happy to keep control of it because it can, it helps them be profitable. And sort of in the most cynical sense, you could say, oh yeah, they're happy to make it very exclusive. And so there is but that may not be what's best for the world. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about that. And it's also on the, maybe even more so on the biodesign tools that are going to be useful for all kinds of different purposes, especially for the global South, and in addressing some of the questions that Dr. Sengupta just mentioned. And we need to make sure that those tools are available, and that we don't, try to lock them up too much before those benefits from those tools can be gained. So I think that there's there's a whole series of difficult conversations to be had about how to strike that balance.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah, and I think we're getting close to the end of this webinar. Finally, before we go, let me, there's a comment from a participant here. He said, there are existing fora like BWC, Biological Weapon Convention, in which many of these issues can be discussed. The BWC is also already almost universal, with most countries from the global South participating. I guess, is there any link between what you're doing, Dr. Sarah and Dr. Sengupta, with, is there any collaboration with the BWC or any plan to expand your activities to fit what Biological Weapon Convention is doing?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, a lot of the work that we do is in support of the BWC, and we are very happy to collaborate there. And in fact, Dr. Bovadoya, I remember that you and I met at a BWC forum a couple of years ago. But I think that one thing that for the International AI Bioforum that we're talking about, this is one reason we're going to be talking about the practices, the ideas, the kind of on the ground path forward for these model guardrails. And in our view, these sorts of practices will support the really great principles that the BWC lays out. And I think that that's sort of the difference, in the discussions there. The BWC is very good at putting together these overarching principles and trying to push these ideas forward. But I think that they can benefit from some of the more discussions about the actual tools, the practices, the very practical hands-on ideas for what to do with these tools, especially since it is very likely that those kinds of practices are going to be changing very, very rapidly. And like the technology itself is changing very, very rapidly. And I think that this kind of forum with that kind of flexibility can really be a good complement to something like the BWC that is, that is larger and moves a little bit more slowly and deliberatively. And I think that those two things can go hand in hand.
And I will add to Dr. Carter's thought, and I'll just say that we are constantly, the work that we are doing is in support of a lot of work that BWC and WHO and all these bigger forums are doing. But also, that being said, keeping in mind that couple of things, because like Dr. Carter said, this whole emerging technology and the governance that needs to go on hand in hand is a very fast-paced kind of evolving situation. The same way, I think Dr. Tamari was mentioning there on the chat, is that every continent and every country, their priorities are a little bit different on what is the biggest priority that they have or the biggest challenge they are trying to solve. So meaning that the application of these very powerful tools will be different as well. So I think coming together as a national framework and then participating in an international framework, which is a little more dynamic and agile, and then kind of bringing those best practices into bigger forums like BWC would be much more meaningful. The second thing to keep in mind, BWC is mostly focused on a lot of the deliberate misuse situations we have discussed for this technology. Anything that we are discussing beyond that, like Dr. Carter mentioned, very important aspect of this, which is the equity or equitable access, those kind of practices, and what should be the discussion on hand for that, based on the priority, based on where the software or the developers are located. Those kind of information is evolving, changing, and it is very fast-paced. So I think those discussion has to have on the side, we have to have on the side in a national framework, international framework, and then probably a lot of these issues will be better handled when it goes to the BWC a little more, let's just say, structured and organized, like compared to what it is right now.
Yeah, thank you very much for those very interesting contributions. Personal level with the BWC, there are two things that I'm always talking about when we go for BWC meeting. Number one is domestication of BWC itself, because it's a global treaty, and each country has its own domestic challenges that is different from other countries. So ability to effectively domesticate BWC to national issues, to use it to address national issues is one of the things I talk about, because what BWC or what biological weapon is to US is totally different from what biological weapon means to Nigeria. So application of BWC, it depends on how well each of the countries can domesticate it and use it to solve emerging issues in their countries. And the second thing is these emerging technologies are evolving and changing at a very fast pace. So the convention has to continue to update itself to catch up with emerging realities, especially in the biological world. So these are the two issues are always raised in BWC meetings, and hopefully we'll continue to have national, regional, and global discourse to address emerging biosecurity threats that is facing us, either at the national level, regional level, or as the whole world. Like you said, a biological threat in any part of the world, if not properly handled, can become a global threat within a very short period of time. So we all have a role to play, and nobody in the world is safe until everybody is safe. So I think we have to round up the meeting today. We've had very, very interesting discussions, and if we allow the discussion to continue, we may not end this webinar today. But I want to sincerely thank our speakers, Dr. Sarah Carter and Dr. Aparuba Selgupta, for their contribution. It's been an eye-opener to me, and I'm sure to many of our participants. And like I said, this is the beginning. This discourse will not end with this webinar, but hopefully this is a platform for bigger discussions and bigger platforms in the area of AI in Africa, and get we'll do all we can do to create a platform for AI discussion with both policymakers at the national level, regional level, and on the continent, and also see how what we can do to gather scientists and experts in that field to see what Africa needs to do to join the chariot and get involved in maximizing the benefits of artificial intelligence on the continent, and also start as early as possible to start discussions on reducing the risk of these emerging technologies. So thank you very much, Dr. Sarah Carter and Dr. Aparupa Sengupta for this wonderful eye-opening presentations that you've made. And to our participants that have stayed with us for almost 2 hours, we appreciate your contribution, your questions, and your contributions in the last 2 hours. Without the participants, this webinar will not be interesting. The only reason why we'll continue to organize it every month is that we'll know that we have a set of participants that are always willing to join the webinar and always interested to relate with what we're discussing. We have over 100 participants today from almost 30 different countries. So we thank you, our participants and our speakers. And hopefully, by God's grace, we are going to come back this time next month for another interesting edition of the GET webinar series. I hope, but I've not confirmed, that Dr. Sarah Carter and Dr. Segupta will give us the go ahead to share the presentations with our participants, because a whole of them would love to have it. If they give us that go ahead, we're going to share the presentations with the participants. And we're also going to develop a policy brief, like we said, and share it based on this webinar. And there's also a certificate of participation that I will give to our participants at the end of every webinar. So thank you very much to Dr. Sarah, Dr. Segupta. We're very honored to have you on our platform today. And to our participants, we're grateful that you're part of us again for this edition. By God's grace, we're going to meet again same time next month to discuss another very interesting issue in the area of OneNet and biosecurity. On behalf of management and staff of GET and members of secretariats that make sure that the logistics have been perfect in the last 2 hours, thank you very much. And from Nigeria, have a wonderful afternoon and wonderful rest of the day. Bye to everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much
Bye-bye.
for inviting me. This has been really fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Yeah. Bye.